Okay, let's start in the Atlantic with the first in the Atlantic, Buffalo, versus the first wild card, Boston. The Sabres ended their postseason drought. They're returning back to the playoffs for the first time since 2011. The season series is an interesting kind of statistic. I'm not going to put too much weight in that because I think that during the season there are so many more factors that play into whether or not a team plays well on a particular night, given, schedule, whether they're coming off a back-to-back versus the other team. They obviously don't prepare specifically for that team in the same way that they do during the playoffs, but I am going to list some of the season statistics just for the sake of completion. The season series was 3-1 for the Bruins, with two of those Boston wins happening in overtime. Boston outscored Buffalo 12-11, so pretty close, really. That's not a significant sway one way or the other during the regular season. They were a relatively close kind of matchup. Looking at some of the deeper statistics, Boston, I think, are interesting in that they haven't been a good play driving team this year. They finished the season 24th out of 32 teams in offensive play driving, and they're kind of middle of the pack in defensive play driving and goaltending at 18th. They were 10th of all 32 teams in finishing those, so probably a large part of that has to do with Pasternak and some of those abilities to score when an average team maybe couldn't. They're an interesting team that's gonna kind of hang in there, I think, and they're a team that's built for the playoffs, as I'll talk about shortly. Buffalo look a lot better on paper from the perspective that they were first in the league in finishing. They finished more of their chances than any other team, 11th in overall offense play driving, and they were 17th in defensive play driving and goaltending. So kind of similar in those other stats, but finishing a lot more of their chances. Really kind of both teams maybe, kind of overperforming a little bit in finishing. Looking at this series going into it, I think Buffalo are a deeper team overall, but Boston obviously have the experience. And to be honest, it's hard to ever pick against Boston, even in a matchup that they are outclassed in, just because of how much they just get away with absolute murder in the playoffs. They are, a team that knows how to, really kind of take advantage of the whistles going away. They're not going to make it easy on Buffalo either way. The most recent playoff matchup between the two teams was in 2010, so obviously a long time ago, where the Bruins beat the Sabres in the quarterfinals in 6 games. Looking at some of the kind of statistical odds, MoneyPuck has the odds at 54.3% for Buffalo, and JFresh has the series at 61% for Buffalo. I think Buffalo will take it out. I'm going to pick Buffalo in 7, but I think that Boston are going to make it hard for them every step of the way, and it's probably not a series that Buffalo are going to get out of without a lot of bruises and injuries. I think that's kind of just how Boston is going to have to play to compete in this series. But yeah, I'm picking Buffalo in 7. Going on to the Flyers versus the Penguins, the Battle of Pennsylvania. This was by far the most fun potential matchup that could have come out of all of those teams that were vying for the chance to play against Pittsburgh, who finished second in the Metro, and there were 3 or 4 teams that were vying to try and slip into the third spot in the Metro, but just missed out. Interestingly, both of these teams were not expected to make the playoffs this season. They both had very low odds of making the playoffs, and the Flyers up until pretty much the Olympic break still didn't look like they were going to. They have, of all teams since the Olympic break, the Flyers earned 35 points in the standings. Only Buffalo earned more with 36 heading into tonight's game, which they also won. So I think that they have a little bit more of that, but that's based on a tweet from a couple of days ago from Bob Grove. But the Flyers have been red hot, obviously, since the Olympic break, and that has accounted for all of the other Metro teams falling off, and the Flyers kind of taking that ball and running with it. The season series is basically 2-2. Both of those Flyers wins, however, went to the shootout, which Pittsburgh was absolutely atrocious in this season. Thankfully, there's no shootouts in the playoffs, so that probably helps a lot. Pittsburgh outscored Philadelphia 16-9 during this series. It's an interesting stylistic clash, these two teams, because the Flyers have been an incredibly defensive team this year, and the Penguins are a lot stronger offensively as a team. It's a real kind of unstoppable force versus a movable object kind of matchup. Since the Olympic break ended with, we talked about the Flyers going on that hot run. They were second in the NHL in goals against at 2.4, and the Penguins were second in the NHL in goals for at 3.76. So really, there are very few teams that were hotter offensively than the Penguins and hotter defensively than the Flyers. So this is going to be an interesting kind of matchup in that regard. Pittsburgh has kind of been a little bit like middle of the pack in terms of their offensive play driving and finishing, and not particularly great in terms of their goaltending at 26th in the league. They defensively have been reasonably good, however, at 8th overall, but their offensive was 21st and their finishing was 19th, so kind of middle of the pack in terms of other teams. But obviously they've had a very weird season of injuries, things in and out. I don't know, if that's necessarily representative of the team as they stand going into the playoffs. Philadelphia is a weird statistical look. They are first in the league in defensive play driving, but they are 29th in the league in offensive play driving. So basically they are one of the worst offensive teams in the league and the best defensive team in the league. And they finished 22nd in finishing. But they had almost the worst goaltending in the league at 31st. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think that to strategize for this series, Philadelphia are going to have to try and shut down Pittsburgh offensively, which historically hasn't been something that they've been particularly good at, and Pittsburgh have historically been very good at breaking through teams that try to stifle them defensively in the playoffs. So I don't know, and as we know, any team and any goalie can get hot going into a playoff run. If Philly's goalie goes on a heater, that might be enough for them. But, looking at the scoring history of players like Crosby and so forth, who have now been returning to the playoffs after a 3-year drought, tends to put up a lot of points on these kinds of teams. I suspect that the Penguins will find a way to get through that. The last time the teams met was 2018 in the first round. Pittsburgh won in 6. For this series, Money Park has the odds at 52.5% for the Penguins, and Jay Fresh has the series at 62% for the Penguins. I'm picking the Penguins in 6 for this series. Returning back to the Atlantic, we have Montreal and Tampa. Tampa finished second in the Atlantic, and Montreal finished third on the same points, but with a tiebreaker. This is the 9th in a row playoff berth for Tampa, and the 2nd in a row for Montreal, who last year lost in 5 games to Washington in the first round. The series over the course of the season is 2-2, with the Habs winning the last 2 games, the most recent 2 games, if you want to put any weight into that. So they've basically been, relatively evenly matched up in terms of their results. Montreal statistically are the 6th best offense play driving team, but the 27th of defensive play driving. So obviously they've been a lot better on offense than they have on defense. They finished 4th in finishing and 2nd in goaltending, which obviously made up for a lot of that defensive downside. Obviously, it's been career years for Suzuki and Caulfield, which has helped, quite a bit to, bolster this team and get them across the line from being, a team that was, fighting for a bubble spot to making their way into the top 3 in the Atlantic. Tampa finished in the top 10 in all categories. They were 10th in offensive play driving, 7th in defensive, 7th in finishing, and 7th in goaltending. So, not the best team in the league, but, very much, a high in class in every category kind of team. It's interesting, I think, that, this is a bit of a story of a veteran playoff team versus an up and coming team, and they have some interesting, relatively recent history. It's over 10 years ago now, but we had obviously everyone remembers Montreal sweeping Tampa, who were red hot in 2014, but ran up against Montreal, who beat them in 4 games in the first round, and then Tampa came back to beat them in 6 games in the second round of 2015, the year after. So there's a little bit of history there. It's not the same players, obviously. This is a long time ago now, but I'm sure it's still in the memory of fans. Money Park has the odds at 53.8% for Tampa, and JFresh has the series at 72% for Tampa. That's the biggest gap and the biggest odds in the East for any team. Which, interestingly, I'm on the side of Tampa as well. I'm picking Tampa in 6. I just don't know that I trust what Montreal is doing will hold up. But as we said, any team can get hot in a short series. It's entirely possible that they might upset Tampa again, but I think Tampa goes into this series as the favorite, and I'm picking them at 6. All right, so now we return to our first crossover series, where a team from the Atlantic plays a team from the Metro. Ottawa, who finished in the second wildcard spot, will be playing first in the Metro team, Carolina. Carolina now makes it 8 seasons in a row of playoff berths, including 3 Eastern Conference Finals appearances, including last season. Ottawa, however, is making it back to the playoffs for the first time since 2017, when they lost in the first round. So this is a big opportunity, obviously, for Ottawa to, kind of break out of that playoff drought. But they are, really probably up against the hardest team in the Eastern bracket from a historical perspective and from a regular season performance perspective. Carolina finished first in the league in offensive play driving and 13th in defensive play driving. However, they finished 30th in finishing, which is exactly who Carolina is. They are a team who possesses the puck, who gets lots of chances but cannot bury them, and that is kind of the story of who this team is. They finished 23rd in goaltending overall, so relatively average goaltending. Ottawa, on the other hand, are kind of a flip side of that script. They finished 5th in offensive play driving, which is obviously very good, and 2nd in defensive play driving. So, a little bit of a offense versus defense matchup in the same kind of way there. However, similarly to Carolina, they finished 26th in finishing. So both teams that are very good possession-wise, but with very low, scoring, scoring from their opportunities. They finished 19th in goaltending. So, very similar kind of profiles for both of these teams, and I suspect because of that, because they probably won't be high scoring games, we're probably in for a very grindy series. A lot of possession, but maybe not a lot of finishing, a lot of dirty goals in front of the net, probably a lot of 2-1 games, lots of shots on net but not a lot of scoring. The Hurricanes won the season series of 3 games, 2-1, but the teams apparently have never met before in the playoffs, from what I can see. Money Park has the odds at 58.3% for Carolina, and JFresh has the series at 51% for Carolina, which is the closest of all first-round predictions. I'm really kind of wavering a little bit on this one. I think if I have to tie break it, I'm going to give the experience pick to Carolina. I think that this is probably going to be a long series. I think this is going to be a difficult one to close out, but I'm going to pick Carolina in 7.